bring in Professor Brahmachalani, because on this aspect, India wants good relationship with America, India wants good relationship with China, but it seems that neither China nor America under Trump want to see India rising. Except for engaging with China in the manner in which India is, given the threat of this additional 25% tariff and then threats of more tariffs. Is there a better way to move forward on China, Professor Chilani, in your view? Can the resumption of border trade, for example, or giving China more access to Indian markets only if India gets more access to Chinese markets, is that the only way forward, sir?
Well, better relations between India and China certainly are in India's own interests. So stabilizing the equation with Beijing is something that India should be pursuing, but not by obscuring basic facts, not by making one-sided concessions. For example, the Finance Minister Sitharaman has signaled moves to further liberalize trade with China, even though Beijing's bilateral trade surplus with India already exceeds the entire Indian defense budget.
Yes.
Now we are moving in the direction of giving greater access to the Indian market without reciprocity, because China still has these non-tariff barriers to Indian exports. India has agreed to ease visa rules for Chinese nationals recently. It has bowed to Beijing's demand to resume direct commercial flights. And what is India's response to China's recent admission that it's constructing the world's largest dam just a few miles from the Indian border? The Indian response has been deafening silence. No statement, no démarche, no invocation of international norms, despite the super dam's likely impacts on India's water security, ecological balance, and broader strategic interests. Now, this is not the way you should be seeking engagement with China. Had China been in India's place, would it have been quiet if India was building a dam and India had been upstream and India was building a dam right on the China border? Certainly not. Or if India had been occupying Chinese land, had changed the status quo on the ground along the line of actual control, would China have sought to obscure that fact? No. So,
Ambassador,
let's not obscure the basic facts. Yes, it's important to engage China. It's also okay for Prime Minister Modi to visit China for the SCO summit and to have a bilateral with Xi Jinping. But why are we in the national discourse obscuring basic facts?
Not on India Today and not on India First, and that is why we put out all facts in public domain for our viewers to decide the best road ahead and who looks after national interests best. Because Ambassador Trigoniyat, unilateral concessions made to a bully make you appear weak. You heard what Professor Brahmachalani said. Unless India gets greater access to the Chinese markets, and that's something that we've been seeking for decades, the trade imbalance is almost $100 billion. Is China doing anything to address that? Are we able to put that message across? We're thinking of giving them more access to our markets. Yes, we may want to, in the short term or medium term, improve our economy, but in the long term, doesn't it adversely impact us, sir?
Gaurav, I fully agree what Dr. Chilani has said. But at the same time, you must understand that it is not that everything is shouted from the rooftop. In diplomacy, a lot of things are done quietly. If you remember, this afternoon when Dr. Jaishankar met him, and he mentioned that we are going to talk about data sharing, and he also mentioned that certain issues when I was there I had raised with you. So there are a lot of things that are continuing to go there. And it's not that something, and this non-tariff barriers or difficulty in entering the market, you got to really look at it from two ways. If you are a trade business person, that all our businessmen are going. I mean, while we were having problems with China after Galwan, our trade was continuing to increase because the dependencies are so much. When you talk about your being a pharmacy of the world, 70% of APIs are coming from there. Rare earths, China is the leader today, so you got to get there. Now, if you want to cut your nose to spite the face, that's a very different thing. But this is why the negotiations, the talks are necessary. There are different institutional mechanisms that are going to address this issue, and they have been addressing. And China understands that India is not a walkover. And there is no obscurantism in this whole thing. Everybody knows that China is sitting on some large territory of India, and we are talking about that. That's where the border comes into picture. But China is there, and they understand these are the problems. But we got to, I mean, what we are trying to do basically have our own until such time that we are able to have our own become a real uh, player in the global value supply chains. You will have to continue to work with one or the other. And
Okay.
trade is never equal. Trade is depends on comparative advantage of nations. So we got to
But
grow our
right now,
comparative advantage to be able to
both
compete
the
with them.
competitors, Zorawar Daulat Singh, it appears they don't want India to grow, to rise and grow at all. Look at the manner in which India did everything to improve ties with the United States of America. Prime Minister Narendra Modi was amongst the first of the bloc. February, he was in the United States of America. There was talk of a trade deal by fall. But look at the manner in which Donald Trump is behaving. You cannot have a trade deal when Donald Trump behaves in this manner. And of course, not just with India, with countries like Japan and South Korea and European Union and other partners. My only point is, where does that leave India? So you have a hostile China on one side and a hostile America on the other.
No, so the whole point is that are we going to accept that other great powers are not going to spawn new great powers, right? This assumption we made 20 years ago that we're going to sort of ride the American superpower to your own great power status. I think that's where the geopolitical miscalculation in Indian statecraft has led us into a situation today where we are now clawing our way out of it. And for that, you have to, if you're saying there's a multipolar world, means there are other non-Western powers that matter, right? That are vital to international security, to the global economy. Are you going to deal with these players? You have to deal with them, right? Now we have a neighbor that itself raises enormous complications. There's a 200-year history from British India. We had undefined frontiers. But I think on the whole, the China policy from across governments, and it's strange to see the opposition because they've pretty much followed a similar pragmatic policy in the past. They made mistakes, yes. So has this government. But at the end of the day, today's international system requires stabilization with China on dignified terms, which is what the MEA said, right? So, what are those dignified terms? You need a stable frontier. You need to have a mutual win-win economic interdependence. But you're going to do that by opening the door, right? You're not going to sort of by issuing press notes, and so you're going to have to bargain for better terms. But I feel the Chinese side are not interested now on the India front. They've got a bigger issues at stake. They've got the Eastern Front with the United States, which is poised for instability and competition for the next 20 years. So why not use this as an opportunity to build up your economy and forget about the illusion that great powerhood is going to come on you and bestowed upon you. It's going to happen through your internal dynamics. Look at the Chinese in
Blood
the
and
last 30
sweat.
years. They use
Yes.
the United States to build themselves up. Now, in our case, we thought the US will be that player. I think we're going to have to be a bit more sophisticated. China may very well be one of the pillars of India's economic rise. How you define that economic interdependence is the challenge for Indian policymakers. But we are not going to fall for this trap for the US, which has set you up to fail, to fight on your shoulders, China. They're going to have to take on China themselves. We have our own differences, but we can manage them without
That's a
getting
very
into a
interesting
frontal
point
collision.
you should mention. Does that explain, Professor Chilani, Donald Trump's frustration to an extent, or America's frustration towards the end? Because initially, from the next step in strategic partnership to the pivot to Asia and India, from Asia Pacific to Indo-Pacific, of course, now they're furiously backpedaling to Asia Pacific. Did they think that they would use India to fight China? And when that boomeranged or that didn't happen, their interest in India is waning, or at least Trump wants to push India down and not help India rise?
I think as far as Trump is concerned, there are two sides of Trump. One is the transactional side of Trump, and the other is a strategic minded Trump. And the Alaska summit showed that when Trump puts his transactional instincts in check, he's able to think strategically. The Alaska summit was not just about the Ukraine war, it was about resetting America's relationship with Moscow, because now there is recognition in the Trump administration, especially in the Trump White House, that US policy has pushed Russia closer to China, creating a two against one alliance with the US at the receiving end. This has been America's ultimate nightmare. Now, this is a nightmare of America's own making. And what Alaska Summit showed was that Trump is now seeking to undo the damage that US policy has inflicted on America's own interests. He is seeking better relations with Moscow in an effort to pry Russia away from China, because he understands that America's main challenger, the main adversary, is China. And I think in that larger context, his transactional approach, punitive approach toward India may also be moderated, because as he realizes that India is critical to the Indo-Pacific strategy of the US, and that without India, that containment of China, reining in China will not be possible. So what we are seeing is just the first chapter in Trump's India-China policy of his second term. I think that policy is going to become more nuanced and more strategic as the transactional element takes the back seat.
Okay, and perhaps will he then see, Ambassador Trigone, that India held its line, did not buckle under pressure, but when it comes to China, Ambassador, the point that Congress Party makes, Ambassador, and I want your perspective on this, that India needs China to concur even for patrolling in Depsang or Demchok or Chumar, and that these buffer zones are on the Indian side. And this, the Congress Party says, is compromising our national sovereignty and contradicts the stance that it has to be status quo ante as on April 2020.
Well, that's what precisely India is working on, has been wanting, and whatever has been settled. And if you remember, I mean, it's not before Galwan also, whenever the patrolling was done, it was in the information of one or the other. I mean, there were points up to which fingers the patrolling troops could go both sides. It's only when the trust broken down between the two sides, for whatever reason, I mean, there are different theories for that, because China has not really gained out by doing so what it has done. In fact, it created a much greater enmity with India because of that. But it seems to me that they know and they understand that they are going to address some of our concerns. May not be
Okay.
fully, but that's the reason that I believe that is going to be done. But let's not say that it just started happening this time. Whenever you are negotiating something, then one side says something, you say something. Then in the middle, you settle somewhere. That's how the negotiations take place. But there are certain red lines on which you just can't give in, irrespective whether it is Trump or with Xi Jinping. And I
Okay.
also know that diplomacy today can only be conducted with these giants only if you come from a position of strength. And India has shown the position of strength through even China, and China does understand that. And India has
So
been
China
maintaining that
understands
it's
our
not there.
strengths, you say? Okay. Saral Patel, in the last part of the show, can the resumption of border trade, for example, through Lipulek once again, or Nathula, alongside direct flights that I'm told are likely to start in about a month's time, realistically pave the way for a broader economic cooperation, address some of those issues that the government thinks it may, of trade deficit of $99 odd billion and this reliance on Chinese goods and imports?
So Gaurav, as the ambassador rightly said, that China doesn't respect weaknesses. It rather exploits it. So today, what India needs is action and not appeasement and abbreviations that we have been seeing for last 11 years. So appeasement doesn't mean that you open your market to them just because they are staring at the US tariffs, so that they can dump their goods in our market, which will further rise up the trade deficit. So that is something that the government will have to tread very carefully. And when it
Okay.
comes to Pakistan, our stated policy is very clear that blood and water cannot flow together. But when it comes to China, why is this principle abandoned? The same hands that stained with our blood of our soldiers in Galwan, same hands assisted them in supplying arms to Pakistan during
Tuhin Sinha,
Operation Sindoor. Now we are
quickly
shaking
respond.
hands with them.
If blood and water cannot flow together, how can blood and trade happen together?
Gaurav, if Wang Yi is spending 3 days in Delhi, there is obviously an agenda. India will try to work out certain assurances from China. All of these can't be discussed publicly as the Congress expects us to do, but behind closed doors. And mind you, he's here for another 2 days where he will have very detailed discussions with our NSA. So a lot of assurances will be worked out. I can assure you about that. See, it's an interesting time. While we are discussing China today, Prime Minister Modi ji also had a call with Putin, where Putin briefed him about his talks with Trump in Alaska, and that shows the kind of trust which India has with Russia. So, and sooner than later, I'm also confident that the present stalemate with USA will end and there will be engagement on that front also. So, India is
Okay.
in a very advantageous position at this point of time, at a time when Pakistan, from behaving like a colony of China for the last 2 decades, has suddenly, become subservient to USA. It makes sense to have a guarded and a positive engagement in China with China,
Fair
which is
enough.
precisely what
Let me
we are
give the
doing.
last word to Zorawar Daulat Singh on this part of the show. Zorawar Daulat Singh, your appreciation of the post-Galwan trust deficit, the Chinese and Indian military buildup that's been there for 5 years and counting. What can we realistically expect from this 24th SR talks, 24th round of dialogue between the special representatives, Wang Yi on the Chinese side and National Security Advisor Ajit Doval on the Indian side?
So let's be frank, there's not going to be any major big bang breakthrough that will completely settle all the differences. But I think the trend lines, the symbolism, the both leaderships, the signals coming from the political establishments, the foreign ministries, there's no doubt that this relationship is now being mutually stabilized by both sides. Why they're doing it, each side has different interests for it. We can look at what the Chinese want from it. But from India's point of view, I think we have reached a situation in the regional geopolitics where to continue down the old policy of relying on the US to safeguard your core security and economic interests is becoming unviable. So you are
Okay.
actually now course correcting. And for that, I think there will be a level of normalization with China. Now, how far it goes and how quick it happens, a lot will be with international developments as they unfold. But even for its own sake, regardless of our relationship with the United States, we need to now have some kind of a working relationship with China. And once you have outlined what are those areas, I think it's going to be economy, more people to people contact, confidence building, and concrete de-escalation on the
Okay.
line of action control, and perhaps even on something on regional security where we can try and put some pressure or on the types of military technologies that are being transferred to Pakistan, because that is something which is going to put
Very.
enormous pressure on Indian military modernization.
Oh, you're absolutely right. The PL-15s, the J-10Cs, and the satellite information intelligence that Pakistan got. To all my guests, many thanks for joining me. Abhimanyu knew how to enter the Chakravyuh. He didn't know how to exit. But Arjun did. India is right in midst of that Chakravyuh, and Yuddhai Krit Nishchaya is the way India seems to be approaching this. Many thanks for joining me.